two Chinese scientists who studied bats in Australia are being looked into by world intelligence organisations as part of a probe into the origins of the coronavirus.
Hello, I'm Paul Barry. Welcome to Media Watch. And with 3.5 million coronavirus cases worldwide and almost 250,000 dead, we all want to know how the deadly disease got loose. And last Tuesday, this exclusive report from the Daily Telegraph's Sherry Markson, which was seized on by TV and radio news, gave us a pretty good steer on who is to blame.
Batman! Exclusive!
Chinese scientists linked to virus probe worked in Australia.
Markson's front-page splash in the telly was such a hot story that Melbourne's Herald Sun ran an almost identical version, telling readers it could reveal that the Five Eyes intelligence agencies of Australia, Canada, New Zealand, the UK and US were, quote,
understood to be looking closely at the work of a senior scientist at the Wuhan Institute of Virology, Peng Zhou, and fellow scientist Shi Zhengli as they examine whether COVID-19 originated from a wet market or whether the naturally occurring virus may have been inadvertently released from a level 4 laboratory in Wuhan.
Inside the paper, headed Aussie Links to Bat Lab Duo, was a double-page spread with pictures of the high-security Wuhan lab and the scientists who've been studying bat viruses there, similar to the one causing COVID-19. And while it wasn't stated, the implication was clear, not least to some TV reporters following it up, that these scientists may have screwed the world by letting the virus get out.
Of course, when COVID-19 first broke out, it was believed that it originated from the Wuhan wet markets, but it's now been revealed, that it could have actually accidentally been released from the Wuhan Institute of Virology.
So how likely is it that the virus escaped from that Chinese lab? Well, in short, it's not, despite concerns expressed by the Americans in 2018 about lax standards, and despite what President Trump has been saying. And in her follow-up next day, Markson pretty much admitted that, telling readers,
in the upper echelons of the Morrison government, it is now considered unlikely the naturally occurring, highly infectious coronavirus came from a laboratory.
And adding,
in the early days of the outbreak, the probability was initially placed at around 50%, but this was swiftly downgraded to a 5% chance as more became known about the virus.
As you can see from that headline, Markson also admitted the lab claims were 3 months old. So, why did the lab escape theory still dominate the story, especially when virus experts had dismissed it 3 days earlier in the Sydney Morning Herald?
COVID-19 did not come from lab.
The evidence is overwhelming that the virus that causes COVID-19 jumped from animals to humans, rather than escaping from a laboratory, virus experts say.
Sherry must have missed that bulletin, and the fact that the virus wreaking havoc across the world, SARS-CoV-2, is not one the Wuhan lab was known to be working on. And while one of its bat viruses, RATG13, is closely related, sharing all but 4% of the genetic material, that is a significant gap.
4% does not sound like a lot, but for a virus it is a huge difference, huge enough to conclusively signal RATG13 did not become SARS-CoV-2.
Or, as bat virus expert Dr. Josh Hayward from the Burnett Institute put it,
it's like saying, I know your closest relative and it's your fourth cousin.
The biggest difference between those two virus cousins, and a vital one, is that Wuhan's RATG13 does not have the capacity to infect humans. So, not only would it have needed to escape from the lab, it would also have needed to rapidly mutate, or to have been engineered by the Chinese scientists. And while the Wuhan lab does do such things, the world's top virus experts from the US, UK and Australia, writing in Nature, rule it out in this case.
Our analyses clearly show that SARS-CoV-2 is not a laboratory construct or a purposefully manipulated virus.
One of those experts, Sydney University's Professor Eddie Holmes, who helped map the genome of SARS-CoV-2, went even further last month with a statement to say,
there is no evidence that SARS-CoV-2, the virus that causes COVID-19 in humans, originated in a laboratory in Wuhan, China.
And the CSIRO, where the two Chinese scientists once studied bat viruses, agrees, telling Media Watch,
research of the genome has found no evidence of laboratory manipulation, and there is no published evidence of this virus having been previously identified.
Last month, Professor Holmes also had this to say in a webcast.
There are a number of really clear reasons to believe this is not in any way a lab construct or a lab escape. It looks for all the world, and I'm certain it is, a natural coronavirus that's come from an animal in a natural setting. There's nothing in there at all that is a signature of laboratory manipulation. So I think we can pretty safely put those conspiracy theories to bed.
So, given all those expert doubts, was this sensational treatment really justified?
Batman! Exclusive!
We think not. We also think Markson should have told readers that almost every virus expert had dismissed the lab escape theory. And we believe this get-out in the middle of the story, that the telly's not suggesting the two scientists were responsible for the outbreak, is insufficient. Meanwhile, does anyone still believe? Well, yes, they do. President Trump, for one.
Have you seen anything at this point that gives you a high degree of confidence that the Wuhan Institute of Virology was the origin of this virus?
Yes, I have. Yes, I have.
And what is the evidence? He refused to say, as did the US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, who in a confused and contradictory interview repeated the claim to ABC America.
I can tell you that there is a significant amount of evidence that this came from that laboratory in Wuhan.
Clearly, the lab escape story is one the Trump administration wants to be true. And the New York Times claims Trump officials have been pressing US intelligence agencies, unsuccessfully, to find evidence for it. Last week, the US Director of National Intelligence said it was still looking, but declared that it agreed with, quote,
the wide scientific consensus that the COVID-19 virus was not man-made or genetically modified.
And on Friday, our Prime Minister also came down strongly against the Wuhan lab theory.
What we have before us doesn't suggest that that is the likely source. There's nothing that we have that would indicate that was the likely source.
But none of that was enough to persuade Rowan Dean on Sky News, who on Friday said that the virus almost certainly did escape from the Wuhan lab and that President Trump was to be congratulated.
Everything points now to it actually having come from a viral laboratory. There's two of them in Wuhan. It's always been likely or certainly possible that the virus somehow escaped either accidentally or, heaven forbid, deliberately from one of these viral laboratories.
The lab escape, of course, is not the first theory to blame China, nor the most unlikely. As viewers of Media Watch will recall, Bronwyn Bishop told Sky in March that the virus was a biological weapon, deliberately released by the Chinese government. And China has made similar accusations against America, as has US conspiracy theorist George Webb, who blamed America for creating the virus at a biological weapons facility and identified a cyclist in the US Army Reserve as patient zero, claiming she took the infection to Wuhan last October to the World Military Games. China, of course, loved that story.
China is now blaming a lone US cyclist for coronavirus.
Meanwhile, Wuhan lab conspiracy theorists point to this video. I found the source of the coronavirus, viewed more than 2 million times on YouTube, which claims patient zero was infected in the Wuhan lab.
Huang Yanling was a researcher in the lab working on the virology of bats with Shi Zhengli, and she's missing. Most people believe her to be patient zero, and most people believe she's dead. Everyone on the Chinese internet is searching for her, but most believe that her body was quickly cremated and the people working at the crematorium were perhaps infected.
Most people? I think he means most conspiracy theorists on the internet. But the case of Huang Yanling did get a mention in The Telegraph over the weekend as the lab worker who disappeared in another Markson scoop. Stretching over 5 pages in all, with 4 inside the paper, its front page proclaimed,
World exclusive!
China's batty science.
Bombshell dossier lays out the case against the People's Republic.
Markson appears to have got the drop on this dossier from someone close to government who believes China should be brought to account for the pandemic that has so damaged the world. And it is disturbing stuff, detailing experiments on bat viruses which have been conducted in the Wuhan lab and raising questions about whether they're safe. It's a great get by Markson, and we congratulate her for making it quite clear that despite everything, the Australian government still believes
the virus most likely originated in the Wuhan wet market, but that there is a remote possibility, a 5% chance, it actually leaked from a laboratory.
Sherry Markson told Media Watch,
I have been very careful to point out in every story on this topic that the Morrison government's position is that it is unlikely the virus accidentally escaped from a lab, unlike the position of the US government.
That, of course, won't stop people like Sky's Rowan Dean insisting it must be true. And nor this report in last week's Sydney Morning Herald that Australian intelligence have found no evidence to support the theory. As one senior source admitted to the paper,
we can't rule it out. We can't rule out a lot of things. It's hard to prove a negative.
It is indeed, which is why conspiracy theories like this are so hard to kill. And as we all know, it doesn't take much to start one. And if you want a case in point, try this news report in which Queensland Premier Anastasia Palaszczuk rolled up her sleeve for the cameras last week to get herself a flu shot.
The perfect push for Queenslanders, like the Premier, to get the jab.
Oh, that's already... I didn't even feel it.
But her important public health message was soon derailed by claims she'd faked it. And why was that? Because, as some eagle-eyed viewers noticed...
Of course you didn't feel it, with the cap still on the needle.
That was soon shared by anti-vaxxers on social media and so-called online news sites. And by the next day, it was even being aired on talkback radio.
I see Anastasia got a flu needle the other day.
She got a flu needle?
Yeah, pretty tough needle.
What do you mean?
There's a cap on the needle.
Is there really?
By then, 7 News had already tried to quell the growing conspiracy by releasing the raw video on Twitter, which revealed Palaszczuk getting the flu shot for real.
Oh, that's already... I didn't even feel it.
And if you take a closer look and zoom in, you can clearly see the needle. So, what was the problem? Well, the jab was over in a flash and the photographers missed the shot. So, they called for a second take.
Okay, that was so quick.
Do it again.
It was over before it began.
And so they did, allowing photographers to get their shot. It is an important lesson for the media and politicians. Don't fake a vaccine shot, at least not with the safety cap on, because there's always someone watching. So, is that the end of the conspiracy? Of course not. It just gave birth to a new one.
What we still don't know, and will never know, is what was in the syringe, the flu vaccine or a simple harmless saline solution.
It seems fighting fake news is a game of whack-a-mole. But now, to the Queensland billionaire who's helping to save Australia's struggling media sector.
He doesn't shy away from a headline, and now Clive Palmer is creating his own, thrusting himself back into the spotlight.
He's tried big cars and big billboards. Now Clive Palmer's big splash, announcing he spent big cash.
Clive Palmer just loves being in the media, even though it often attacks him. And his new message, which was all over Australia's newspapers last week, centres on a would-be coronavirus cure we discussed on Media Watch.
Clive Palmer's taken out a 3-page ad in newspapers across the country to tell us all he's bought 32.9 million doses of hydroxychloroquine. That's the anti-malaria drug currently being studied to see if it works against COVID-19.
Now, Clive is not a man who can be accused of modesty, buying 3 pages in The Age and Sydney Morning Herald on Saturday to advertise his good deed. And last week, we counted an incredible 79 pages of ads across News Corp papers and the West Australian. Yes, 79 full-page ads. And because they are in his trademark yellow, they're hard to miss.
The small contribution that I have made will assist Australia in getting back on its feet sooner.
But will it? Palmer also claimed...
hydroxychloroquine was the best hope for those suffering COVID-19.
Well, we're pleased to say that was fact-checked by some of the newspapers which took his money, with the Cairns Post seeking out a local doctor to warn against claims of a cure, and the Townsville Bulletin also warning the ads could be dangerous.
We don't want people to think because he has done this, everyone should be asking their GPs for it, Dr Clements said. It looks dangerous in terms of treating COVID-19, and the trials in prevention are still way too early to tell.
The 9 newspapers also called for caution with this explainer, likening the so-called miracle drug to a mirage. So, how much has Clive Palmer spent on selling this cure to Australians? We're confident in saying more than $400,000, a number we put to Clive Palmer's spokesperson, who declined to comment. So why is he spending so much, particularly in Queensland, to advertise a drug which remains at best unproven and in some cases fatal for those with COVID-19? Last week, the Australian gave us the likely answer.
Clive Palmer has confirmed his political party is considering contesting this year's Queensland state election.
You might recall Palmer spent more than $80 million on last year's federal election campaign, but failed to win a single seat. That is a miserable return on investment, but it's great news for the media if he's running in Queensland and splashing the cash again. They can report on his antics and get paid to run his ads. And if anyone gets malaria, well, he can treat that too. That's all from us tonight. There's more on our website, including statements from Sharry Markson and the CSIRO. And don't forget, Media Bites every Thursday on your favourite social media platform. But for now, until next week, goodbye.